Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Mika Yamamoto. She is the Chief Marketing and Customer Experience Officer over at F5. Mika, how's it going today?
It's going great. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. It's a snowy day here in Colorado, so we've got our fingers crossed for a white Christmas. We'll see how that turns out. I am really excited to chat with you today. We're going to be talking about the evolving role of marketing in the boardroom and some advice for other marketing leaders as they navigate this changing landscape there. Before we get into that, though, Mika, I would love for you, as always, that we do with our guests here, have you give us a little bit of your background, what you and the team at F5 are up to these days. I would also like you to touch a little bit on your title. Chief Marketing and Customer Experience Officer is not a title we have regularly on the show, and I think it's a little bit interesting for listeners too.
Thanks, Logan, again for having me. In terms of my background, the consistent theme across all of the brands that I've worked on, which include Amazon and Microsoft and SAP and Adobe and Marketo, are that the place that those companies were in when I participated in driving experiences in those companies were that they were looking to target a different marketing segment or market segment or customer segment, or looking to launch a different product. And so thematically, what I focused on working on throughout my entire career is how does a company transform itself to focusing somewhere else? Again, on a new customer segment or somewhere else in terms of introducing a new product or a new channel into the market on the company's behalf. And that's not dissimilar to F5. F5 back in the day started, believe it or not, as a gaming company, and we quickly realized that being a load balancing company probably would drive a lot more results for our customers and for our shareholders. So we became a load balancing company, but over time, we've evolved to be a lot more. We've evolved in the security space. For example, we've evolved and purchased most recently NGINX, which has enabled us to really focus on areas where we haven't been able to focus before, and looking at, exploring areas for companies who are developing in the microservices environment. And so as we look at that evolution, we as F5 need to think about how we run the business differently, including how we consider marketing. And so what we've been up to from a marketing standpoint is really looking at how do we take marketing as a role within a company. And we were formerly purely a hardware company. And how do we take marketing's role in an enterprise focused hardware company and really evolve it? If you look at born in the cloud companies, marketing plays a role in being very smack dab in the middle of being accountable to drive revenues and results for shareholders. It's not to say that marketing, if you're not, driving revenues, that marketing doesn't drive results for shareholders, but we're looking to play a role from a marketing standpoint in having that direct line of accountability to drive revenues. And so that's a transition for us at F5. And so that brings us to the title that I have, which is Chief Marketing and Customer Experience Officer. We're moving into the notion of marketing playing the role of driving performance. Of course, we have as our focus and our priority to deliver, great brand experiences, but as we drive to look at how we're going to drive results on behalf of the company, how we're going to take on that number, not dissimilar to how sales would take on the number as well to drive revenues, we need to look overall at the customer experience. We need to look at how we move as we transition into a software company to look end to end at those customer experiences and not look at them in a siloed fashion. And so having one person and one executive with the mandate of looking at our customer experiences overall across all functions allows that purview for us to be able to look at to optimize customer experiences, to make them more seamless across the company on behalf of our customers and to make them as effortless as possible as well. And we've seen consumer companies optimize that really significantly. And I think that, from a B2B standpoint, if we look at B2B focused companies, this is an area for companies who have more of a legacy, i.e. weren't necessarily born in the cloud. This is a massive transformation that all of us have either gone through or are currently going through.
Yeah. And on this show, Mika, we love to highlight marketing leaders that are in the trenches going through these things. And so that background, I think, was more than just, hey, what are you doing? What are you guys up to? Because you're the guest on the show. But as you mentioned, you are a legacy hardware company going through a transition. And so I think for folks who are specifically in that scenario, they're going to take a lot from this. Even for marketing leaders at companies who are, SaaS from day one, they were, as you say, born in the cloud. There may be less of a transition here, but I think this changing role of marketing in the boardroom is going to apply to a lot of marketing leaders. And so as you've gone through this journey, a few of the things I'd like you to unpack is, how you go about explaining marketing to those in the boardroom and to the rest of the C-level executive team. But before that, I think you've got to start with understanding what their view of marketing may be. Can you speak to that a little bit on how you approach that and what others might want to be thinking about that then is going to inform, I think the next thing we'll talk about is how then do you explain marketing to folks, but you've got to start with understanding where they are today before you can move the needle anywhere, right?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think understanding from where you're starting to understand the perceptions of what people might think. I mean, an example here is we have a varied range of understanding of what marketing could do. And we have, because people have come from past companies who have seen marketing take on a role of driving revenues. And we've got people who have it entrenched in their minds that, marketing drives. To quote one of our sellers, marketing provides donuts and sets up steak dinners. And so we have a very varied view of where people sit in their minds on what we can or can't do. And I think, Logan, your point is great in terms of understanding where you're starting, because from where you're starting is how we need to start the explanation. I mean, for folks who understand and have lived through a digital go-to-market motion where marketing and sales have one go-to-market motion. It's completely seamless. There's very little explanation on the planet that we're trying to get to. It's just that the conversation then becomes, how do we get from where we are to where we need to be as a company? If we're talking about folks who haven't experienced or enjoyed that type of benefit of, marketing and sales, as an example, working in lockstep, there's a lot more education in describing how that's possible. And so knowing where we start is really important to understand where we need to go in terms of how we communicate. I'd say that the other important element is getting really clear on where you want to go. So from a marketing standpoint, in driving the transformation and a company standpoint overall, being able to really cleanly and crisply and simply describe where you're trying to head by way of customer experience and results helps define a North Star and a point of view that then gives people a forward-looking view of where we're headed. And then you can back into, how do we get there from where we currently are, including where people's mindsets sit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really good point about understanding, that point of view of the rest of the team. Are there some tactical examples from your process now? Because, whether you want to define it as, an uphill battle or you've got, further to go, in the way that you've explained your current situation, some things that you've done to explain really the power of marketing to drive revenue. Is it, about casting that bigger vision? Is it about, taking some of your best practices in telling a story externally and taking those and finding a way to tell that story internally to the board members, to the other executive leaders on your internal team?
Well, I mean, I think that describing the power of marketing is best done when you're not describing it in marketing terms. And so, I think every transformation, and for everybody who has gone through one, would say it's an uphill battle. I think everyone who's done so successfully and driven a transformation successfully would say that the need to inspire people along the way and the need to tell us the story of where you're headed along the way is paramount. And doing so in terms that other people use versus and injecting the necessary newer terms that need to be understood, I think is really important. I think, you had mentioned, Logan, how do you explain what marketing does? I think it's by not explaining what marketing does and more explaining the value that marketing provides in the terms that other people and other functions use, predominantly, using the business terms that we use when we're talking about the performance of the company, because those are words and terms that everyone can relate to, because that's how we measure our progress and success. And so if we're able to telegraph the value that marketing will provide in those terms, it helps telegraph where we're headed in a finer point than having to have a decoder ring to have someone understand the marketing terms that we're trying to describe. And so I'd say that, as we go through our transformation here at F5, I'd mentioned that, some people completely understand the planet that we're headed to because they've lived on a similar planet before, because a company, the company they may have came from had already gone through the transformation that we're about to go on, whether it's, moving from on-premise software to software in the cloud, or transitioning from being a hardware vendor into a services vendor or software vendor. There's lots of companies out there who've gone through transformations. And so if you're aware of where we're headed, that requires very little definition and education on that point. And so when we look at those individuals, we're able to rally those individuals, and we call them the coalition of the willing. And it's the people who just know where we're headed, right? And we're able to amass those individuals and not have to educate a lot on, like I said, where we're going, just be able to help determine the path that we need to go down in order to, chip away at the gaps that sit between where we are and where we want to go. That's an easier lift. And so in those areas of the business, and for our area, it happens to be the commercial business, we're able to move a lot faster with a lot more people because those individuals actually know where we're headed. And so we're able to move at a broader scale in terms of processes, in terms of technology we want to put in place, in terms of metrics we want to put in place, just because, again, there's less institutional knowledge and there's less education that we need to take in describing where we want to go. So describing and driving the power of marketing and what marketing can do from a go-to-market motion is a lot simpler in some respects in that case, because there's a lot more people who understand where we're going to go. So we can do more broad and faster changes in that respect. But going broad and fast among a set of individuals where that may not be the case, and the understanding of where we want to go isn't as well understood among a broad audience, going fast slows you down eventually, and going big essentially sees more organ rejection than it does momentum. And so what we've done in those cases where in areas of the business where there's less experience or less knowledge of the place we're going, is we've actually narrowed down the field really, really discreetly. So among 1,000 plus sellers, for example, we've taken and only working with a dozen sellers to be able to describe where we're going and help them on a very one-to-one basis to understand this place we're headed, to be more data-driven. For example, in driving and prioritizing customer decision-making and where we start focusing with our customers when we're trying to drive, selling motions as an example. And so the ability to actually take very few individuals and be able to spend some one-on-one time with them and describe where we're headed, educate those people where we're headed, allows us to be able to show momentum with a small group of people that then helps bring along the broader set of individuals because they can see the success of a very small group. And then we can start to see, success starts to motivate other successes, and the desire to pull information and pull the types of ways of working that we're looking to implement versus it being forced on them in a broad way. In a broad way that, again, like I said, usually results in some kind of organ rejection just because of the educational gap that needs to take place before we actually make those types of broad sweeping changes. Mm-hmm. And so it really depends from a transformational standpoint, the basis of understanding of the people that we're trying to bring along with us in terms of the tactic we're going to take to create a movement and really transform the entire company.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. You probably already know that we think you should start a podcast if you haven't already. But what if you have and you're asking these kinds of questions? How much has our podcast impacted revenue this year? How's our sales team actually leveraging the podcast content? If you can't answer these questions, you're actually not alone. This is why Casted created the very first content marketing platform made specifically for B2B podcasting. Now you can more easily search and share your audio content while getting greater visibility into the impact of your podcast. The marketing teams at Drift, Terminus, and here at Sweetfish have started using Casted to get more value out of our podcasts, and you probably can too. You can check out the product in action at casted.us/growth. That's casted.us/growth. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there. It ties back to what we were talking about earlier, is understanding where you're starting, understanding, the experience, the mindset of the folks throughout the organization. And as you point to, that will inform whether you go narrow or you go broad with the momentum and where is that coalition of the willing? Is it a large, broad group, or is it a small, narrow group? As you were talking about, something that to me, what I heard you say, Mika, was, express your business and your technical acumen with other functional leaders by, avoiding marketing speak and speaking in terms that they understand. To kind of double tap back on that, just for folks listening to this, as you've kind of been through this process, can you give us a few quick examples of, hey, maybe here are 3 that you want to avoid, and here are 3 that you want to make sure you can speak to with confidence as far as, business or technical terms that you might be hearing from your CEO or your chief product officer or, other folks on the executive leadership team?
Absolutely. I think, we just talked about how it's important to, describe the value of what marketing can provide. And the best way to do that is do so in terms that other functions understand. And that's using the terms that they use, frankly, whether it's the business value that they're realizing, or whether it's the technical value or, benefits that we're providing to our customers. I do think that, we are stewards of our customers. And so from a marketing standpoint, we need to speak to our products as well or better than most people can within the company. And that's not most people is in the, better than the engineers, most definitely not. However, we need to be extremely technically proficient if we're actually going to be able to effectively convey our value to our customers, and also to be able to, create effortless experiences for our customers. We need to empathize with them, and therefore we need to number one, understand their needs, but also understand the technical nuances that we bring to them from a customer standpoint. And then, so that's, when appealing to and talking to and dealing with product management functions or engineering functions or even support functions, being able to talk to our products themselves is certainly necessary and required as a competency for us within marketing, because no one should have to understand marketing terms other than marketing individuals. We need to be able to speak in terms that our customers speak, but also that our colleagues speak throughout the company. And the same holds true of business acumen, not only in the language that we speak, but also the only way that we can actually drive maximum value as a function is to really understand how we drive value from a shareholder standpoint and how that's calculated and how that's realized. And that's understanding our commercial models. That's understanding, how we actually make our money, so that you can translate the actions and prioritize the actions that we take as marketing into really maximizing the value for the company. And so the importance of business acumen and technical acumen drives a lot more credibility, again, day to day among peer sets, whether you're an individual contributor or first line manager, but also in the boardroom, when you're speaking about the value that you're driving for the company and speaking to the overall company strategy itself. No one wants to have to interpret terms they don't understand. And marketing terms aren't ones that they should have to understand. Everyone understands at the company, what business value that we're driving as a company. And again, understands how we deliver the shareholder value. Most people understand the technology that we're driving and the benefits of that technology for our customers. And that's the language we need to use in order to have a credible and meaningful conversation with our peers and our customers.
Yep, absolutely. So I know that you're passionate, Mika, about being proactive instead of reactive in explaining the value that marketing can drive. And I think you've touched on that really well today. The opposite of this, of getting the board and the other executive team members to understand the value of marketing, is showing that you as a marketing leader have your finger on the pulse and you have contributions to add to the overall strategy of the business. Can you speak to that a little bit, Mika, as you've looked as a marketing leader, your advice to other marketing leaders out there in how they can contribute to the overall strategy, not just tying marketing into it, but having thoughts, opinions, and value to bring to the overarching organizational strategy?
I think I think that's a great question in terms of saying, okay, how do we telegraph and how do we participate, not just in description, but actually in action and in feedback? How do we participate in driving the best corporate strategy that could be out there to deliver the best value for the company overall? Marketing is in a really great position because marketing gets to interface with the customer in so many different ways and gets to be the customer's advocate and has so much information and data about the customer. And so I would say, number one, understanding again how we drive value in the market overall through our products, but then understanding the voice of the customer and bringing that voice of the customer into all of the decisions we make, so that we're not, internally focused at looking at how we can operate best internally, but they're also always thinking about the end in mind and thinking outside in and thinking about the voice of the customer, and whether it's our existing customers or non-customers or feedback from customers from deals that we may not have landed. It's really important that we make sure that we bring that voice into the boardroom, into every decision that we make. And so I think that in terms of proactively talking to the board or proactively talking to the senior leaders about where we want to head, it's really doing so in the voice of the customer and being able to telegraph how, when we actually, drive, X, Y, Z different processes better or differently on behalf of our customers, this is how, and be able to drive a straight line into how that translates into shareholder value. So as an example, rather than speaking about the technologies that really drive a customer engagement, whether it's talking about email distribution, or whether it's talking about how we're going to, store all of our customer data in a database, what I found more effective is actually to show the end experience that the customer will see, and to compare and contrast with what they experience today, and then to be able to show what they will actually experience in the future. Most people can resonate with a more simple, log-on process, for example. So we're moving from multiple log-ons and more complex log-on experiences to a single log-on experience. We're moving to more simplified means to search for the type of assistance that you need from a support standpoint. So actually showing the value or the customer experience and showing that simplified experience allows us the conversation to be able to show the value that we're driving, because everyone it resonates with everybody as customers themselves, to be able to look at those experiences with, an eye for being a customer themselves, and then being able to to relay that into the actual value that we're providing with customers versus going into technical diagrams or process diagrams that, that really don't show the true value of what the customer will actually experience. And so proactively having that point of view and showing the North Star from the point of view of the customer has been, and then contrasting that from where we are, to where we are, has been the most effective way of being able to telegraph the value we're able to provide when we actually accompany that with what that translates into in terms of growth.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective there, Mika. And it goes back to, the decision you guys have made as a team to have, your role as chief marketing and customer experience officer. And, the most quotable thing I think I take from this conversation is, your advice there that marketing has a lot of data, a lot of feedback, and a lot of input from the market and from the people that your company is trying to reach, and bringing that voice into the boardroom. We all need to bring the voice of the customer into the boardroom because, as you said, it's going to allow marketing to contribute to the overall strategy. And at the same time, what I heard you saying there in that scenario is more of what we were talking about earlier, where you're showing marketing's value in how you're improving and communicating the possibilities to new customers and how your customers are going through their journey and what their experience is like when you take this approach of showing what the customer experience is like in the boardroom. So I think it's a phenomenal bookend to the conversation based on where we started it, talking about your role as marketing and customer experience, both in your title. Mika, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate your passion on this subject and unpacking a few scenarios in your lessons learned along the way as you guys are going through this evolution of marketing's role in the boardroom. For folks who want to go a little bit deeper on this topic, ask you some follow-up questions, or maybe they just want to stay connected with you and learn more about the team over at F5, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or they can reach out to me on Twitter. My handle on both is at Mika Yamamoto 11. So MikaYamamoto 11. I'm going to be happy to do so.
Perfect. Make it nice and easy. Mika, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks a ton, Logan. Have a good day. Good luck with the snow.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.